Councilmember Dickinson,
Here.
Councilmember Hepperly, Councilmember Schumacher,
Present.
Vice Mayor Hunt,
Here.
Mayor Palguda.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. And I believe Councilwoman Hepperly is at Flynn Brown this evening. Start right up with item 2A, Roadway Assessment Program. Ms. Reuter, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Mayor, Mayor, council members. I apologize, I said Vice Mayor first, so Mayor. We have three very exciting topics to talk about today. Public Works has been busily working diligently to move some things forward. And so our first topic that we're going to go through today is actually evaluation of our existing pavement assets and really developing a true data-driven decision on how we maintain our roads. And so today, we are fortunate to have Zach Thomason, Senior Vice President with Roadway Asset Services here today. And I'd like to introduce him. Before I do that, sorry, Zach. Real quick, I just wanted to introduce you all to our new town engineer, John Latier. And he just started with us 2 weeks ago, so he's still becoming familiar. But you will see him quite often at the study sessions and also council meetings.
Welcome, sir.
Zach?
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Heather. Mr. Mayor, Council, it is an absolute pleasure to be here today. I always love driving up from Chandler where I am. And I also get to speak about one of my favorite topics, which is pavement and asset management, which my kids tell me makes me the world's biggest nerd as well. So pavement and asset management, it's an important concept to really grasp. So we're going to talk about what that means. If you're not familiar with us, we're pavement and asset management consultants that work with agencies across the country. So I'm based locally here in Arizona as one of the owners as well, but we do work for agencies all across the country. And as you'll see here in this first slide, we work with large and small agencies alike. So yes, we work with large agencies like Salt Lake Cities and Denver's and Albuquerque's and the Charlottes of the world, but we do a lot of work here locally with agencies like Fountain Hills, Pima County, Coconino County, and whatnot as well. So when we talk about pavement management, the first thing I always kind of like to address is what's the purpose? Why are we even talking about pavement management? And it really serves two critical functions. The first is to maximize the town's limited funds. How do we do so in an effort that maximizes your dollar while selecting the appropriate maintenance and rehab activities on our roadways using data-driven information? The other purpose of pavement management is to extend pavement design life at the absolute lowest cost. So how can we harness some of the new tools and technologies that are out there to treat good roads that are in good condition? And it's often counterintuitive because a lot of folks will think, why aren't we just treating the roads that are in the worst condition? And the easiest way to explain it is it's equivalent to deferring the oil changes and the tire rotations on your vehicle in favor of doing more costly maintenance, such as swapping the engine or changing a camshaft, something that's very expensive. Roads are no different. They need treatment and preservation early on in their life as well. Those are the two primary purposes. This vehicle that you see here, my kids call this our Ghostbusters van. We have 5 of these vehicles that drive around the country. And the 3 pieces of technology that I want to point out here on this asset collection vehicle is that big fin on the back end. That's a high resolution camera with laser line illumination. And its whole job is to measure all the pavement distresses that fall beneath it. So it's measuring the cracks by width and depth and quantifying the different distress types, the rutting of the road, the roughness of the road, the potholes, and all of that information. There's a big boom on top of the van that you'll see there. That's what we call a Ladybug camera. It's a 5-lens panoramic camera that gives us a full view of not only the pavement facing forward, but the right-of-way. We're going to be capturing all of this information, and you will own all of this information as well and all of this imagery that comes with this data collection effort. The last thing I'd like to point out on the equipment is that it does have GPS coupled with inertial navigation. This is critical. Every piece of data that we capture is tied back to your GIS environment. It has a home in your GIS linked to your center lines. So maps of the condition scores of the roads can be plotted on the roadway. One of the things you'll see here that I'll just point out real quickly, that laser system on the back end, it has 1 millimeter horizontal resolution, which is a lot of detailed information. It's equivalent to spraying about 4,000 data points on the road, which is what allows us to measure all of these distresses by extent and severity. I mentioned all of the data is linked back to your GIS. So all of that information, that PCI data, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but PCI stands for a Pavement Condition Index that ranks the health of a road on a 0 to 100 scale. 0 is absolutely horrible on its way back to gravel. 100 is a perfectly brand new road that you paved yesterday. Every block, every segment of road that you own and maintain will have a PCI score associated with it such that we can analyze it as a part of the process. So what you're seeing here is kind of a screenshot of the software that we use. It takes all of this high resolution imagery out of the van and it starts calculating and quantifying all those different distress types so we can have a PCI score on each segment in town. And you're kind of getting a sneak peek into the weeds here, and I won't get too deep into it because I tend to geek out, but you can see what the software does is it starts drawing in all the different crack types and measuring those cracks as a part of the system, but then more importantly starts classifying them. What type of distress is it? Is it alligator and fatigue cracking? Is it block cracking? And all of those have different impacts, not only on the score, but what you might do in terms of maintenance and rehabilitation at the same time. One of the other things that we do for all of our clients is we do an on-site field pilot. So we would come out and walk some roads with you folks. We generally select about 10 miles. And the whole purpose of this is to make sure that your interpretation, that your team's interpretation of pavement distresses is the same as ours. And if it's not the same, then we talk about why. Now, we do adhere to a set of rules that were developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for that distress survey, but it's an important element of the process to ensure that everybody's on the same page in terms of the pavement condition survey itself. And I'm going to kind of skip through some of these for the sake of brevity. I know you folks have a couple things on the list today. What do you get out of this information? So yes, we've got a PCI score and a condition index on every segment of road. You folks are going to have access to every bit of that information. We send it to you in Excel spreadsheets, yes, but it's also linked back to your GIS. And it's also all published in a Power BI dashboard, which makes it easy because you can get to it from a browser and you can see interactive graphics that make a bit more sense than textual data in a table or a spreadsheet per se. And that's what you're seeing here. This is a very typical PCI distribution graph. You folks would get something similar where we plot up the conditions of the town's roadway network. And it can tell us a lot about an agency's funding over the last 5, 10, and 15 years. We look at things like the percent of roads that fall into the good category. That gives us a good indication of what funding's been like over the last decade. Then we also look at roads that fall into backlog. Backlog's all your big ticket work. It's all your full reconstruction and partial reconstruction work that needs to be done. And a part of the modeling and analysis work that we do is running the models to determine, well, what level of backlog do you have? And what's it going to take to control the growth in backlog or even reduce it? And that's important because backlog, typically your average agency, about 10 or 12% of their network is going to fall into that backlog category. As agencies start approaching 15 or 20%, it's a bit of a reality check in that it takes a lot of capital and funding to infuse into the pavement management system to catch up when backlog is growing at such a rapid rate. So when we run these models, we not only look at average PCI scores, we also look at backlog to determine what's the appropriate funding level, or more importantly, what's needed to maintain the existing conditions as they are now in the town as a part of that analysis model. What you're seeing here, I won't go through these in detail. These are various screenshots of several components of the Power BI dashboard that show you not only some of the budget scenario graphs, but also have tables to show the functional classification distributions, how many of your roads that you maintain are residential versus collector versus arterials, and which roads are considered critical from a pavement management perspective as well. So as we start doing the analysis, we work with your team and we start building logical projects with your team such that we can build projects that mimic the way the town does business and does construction work, whether that means grouping subdivisions together or grouping longer projects so that we're more efficient on mobilization with the contractors as well. So part of this process, this analysis routine, is about us chatting with your team and understanding what does the town do now in terms of maintenance and rehab activities. And we can configure all of that information, all of those different activities you do along with your local cost to run the forecast and the model so that you know what you're going to get out of your existing funding level as it is today, or even what you need to attain or achieve a desired level of service within the system. A couple of last things as I start to begin to wrap up. Folks always ask, well, why was this road picked and not this one? And it's a valid question and sometimes hard to figure out in a lot of systems. There's two words that come out of it: prioritization and financial optimization. Prioritization is just creating a list of something that's important, and I'll show you what that list typically is on the next slide. Financial optimization is maximizing your dollars so that we select the right roads at the right time with the right treatment. And what you can see here, these are some of these critical elements that we use to prioritize that list of roads. So we sequence roads, we identify roads that are critical. Critical roads are roads that are within 2 to 4 points of dropping into the next more expensive treatment category. So it behooves us, if we can capture them now this year, we can save exponentially moving forward. If we don't capture those critical roads, they cost more the following year. And of course, we use other elements like traffic volume. Arterials typically have a higher priority over collectors and locals. It's not written in stone, but that's typically the way it happens in the industry, along with some other elements that form this list, this prioritized list for you folks. But the big takeaway is it comes down to financial optimization, managing and maximizing your existing dollar as efficiently as possible. I'm going to kind of cruise through this slide very quickly here. All this is showing you is what that financial optimization looks like. And if you take a look at those yellow bars, when the analysis goes through, it's looking at those critical roads that are on the cusp of becoming more expensive. So it really focuses on targeting those roads before they become more costly over time. A couple other things we do. I mentioned that everything's linked to your GIS, and we plot a lot of maps. We like maps. So you folks are going to get access to PCI maps so that you can see segment level conditions throughout the town. You're going to see the 5-year plan and the prioritization plan in map form as well as the different projects that we've plotted within the system too. What you're seeing here on this slide, this is the result of a 5-year model. So running that financial optimization. These are the budgetary graphs. This is what you want to see at the end of the day because it tells the story of where we are now and where we could be at different funding levels. The line graph on the top is very common. You've probably seen something like that before with other asset management models you've done. The one on the bottom, if you look at that one, it's a bit different. It has annual funding on the x-axis and then the outcome of network average PCI on the y-axis. The neat part about this is that red line is the trend line. We're going to run over 10 models to establish the relationship between funding and the outcome of the condition of your road network. And then we'll plot up various scenarios that are relevant to you folks, meaning how much funding is required to maintain existing conditions. What happens to conditions at your current funding levels? Maybe it's enough, maybe it's not. And we can target other models as a part of that too. Maybe there's a desired level of service that you've adopted that we can plot up as a part of the model. And in addition, we can answer literally any what-if question on the fly in terms of, this is Salt Lake City that you're seeing there, but if their council had asked on the fly, well, what could we achieve if we spent $30 million? With that graph, you can very quickly answer that without having to spend hours and a lot of time rerunning those models themselves. We also do the full council presentations at the end to explain the results very simply in terms of what they mean, what the condition of the network tells us, what the funding levels, what the funding level needs are of the town as well. So we'll be available for that should you move forward. This is just a quick image of some of the imagery on the bottom there. That's that boom, that camera on top that collects that has 5 lenses that collects the HD imagery that you'll get access to as well. And all of that will be linked back to your GIS as a part of that. With that imagery, this is not a part of the scope or the contract that goes before you next week. But the nice part about having that imagery available is that should you desire in the future to need a roadside feature inventory, such as a sidewalk inventory or curb and gutter or signs or fire hydrants, anything that exists in the right-of-way, the inventories can be built using and harnessing that imagery that's captured. So you'll always have access to that and the ability to create those inventories if that becomes a priority in the future. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple questions, sir. Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
What is the frequency of your services? Yearly?
Typically, on average, about every 3 to 5 years. So most agencies right now are doing it every 3 to 4. 5 becomes about that maximum mark where you can use the data to forecast and create models. So 5's the very, very maximum. 3 to 4 is about very typical.
Gotcha. Because in the past, we used probably could be described as an archaic method of managing our streets, where the cul-de-sac up in Unit 19 will get paved on this day no matter what
Right.
the use. So this kind of bypasses that and
Right.
creates a priority over just a calendar.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the whole purpose of this is to use defensible data and sound financial management to select critical roads such that they do not become more costly for you folks. So it's about really creating that optimization plan for you.
My last question is, this is obviously a very technical thing that you do. Like, who's your competition and what makes you different?
What makes us different? So a couple of things. One, we do this on-site field pilot that I talked about before. That is not something folks do in the industry. That is very unique to us. We always come out and meet with our clients. We did the same thing with Pima County and Fountain Hills. We come out and walk the roads to make sure that the interpretation of distresses are all in alignment before everything's processed up and everybody reviews it. And then there's this deer in the headlights type stare because they're out of alignment. So we do the field pilots with folks. We also firmly believe in transparency. And I know a lot of folks say that, but what I mentioned earlier about you getting access to all the imagery, that is not common in the industry. You will not see a line item in our budget for imagery. We give you all of it. Every view of the right-of-way, as well as that downward 4K imagery of the pavements itself, you get and own that. And then lastly, I'll just kind of wrap it up with, there's also a QC validation tool that we give your team access to that resides in Power BI. It makes it far more simpler and easier on them to review, QC, and check and accept our data without having to interpret and sort spreadsheets and databases and things like that.
Gotcha. My final question, from the day you start, when do you finish, and when do we receive like a final report and analysis?
So typically, from notice to proceed to finish, typically it's about 5 or 6 months. Now, what we're targeting here as a part of this project, if this is approved next week, I've got a van, our van right now is running around Coconino County. Before it leaves Arizona, I'm gonna have it pop down here to Prescott Valley and survey the road so that we can have budgetary models and numbers ready for your budget discussions coming up in February and March. So that's fully the intention.
Thank you, sir. Vice Mayor?
So, thank you. So I presume, Heather, we have his fee budgeted in the budget.
Vice Mayor, we do have extra money in the budget that we did not use for chip seal and microslurry. So this is part of setting up a pavement preservation plan. So we're able to use those funds and transfer it to pay for this service. So we have a true pavement preservation plan ready for next fiscal year budget.
So he's covered.
He's covered.
Okay,
yes.
perfect. And then I think you had me from max funds and extended life. I like those terms. And then, so how much does that, if you can share, how much does that asset collection van baby cost?
It's a common question. Each van costs about $1 million.
Wowza.
So you can purchase a van for $1 million. The really tough part about it, though, is what do you do with the data after it's collected? There's no off-the-shelf system for taking the information. So that piece of software I showed you very briefly, we built that specifically to consume that imagery and then analyze the data using that U.S. Army Corps standard that I mentioned earlier, too.
So I have a really funny story I have to share. I told Lucy about it yesterday, but so my degree's in urban regional planning studies. I graduated from Terre Haute, Indiana State, and I did my internship with the city of Terre Haute and with urban region planning. And I did a very similar map to this PCI segment map, and so it brought back memories for me. But back then, I was the asset collection van,
Right.
and it was a window survey.
Absolutely.
So I drove up and down every road in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Right.
And I did a map, and I was looking for it because I wanted to bring it in to show Heather, and I'm still going to try to find it. But I did a map of Terre Haute, Indiana, and it was red, yellow, and green at the time of all of the roads in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Right.
And so, for the mayor's office there. And so this brought back some awesome memories. Thank you for that.
You bet.
And then, so what I heard you what I think I heard you say is you collected all of the data, so the signs and the fire hydrants, sidewalks, everything we're only working on the roadways for now. But if we call you up next year, same time, when we're planning a budget or a capital improvement project and say, can you tell us about sidewalks? You could just go and send us a report and you don't have to come and drive it again.
Not quite as simply as that, but yes, we can. So what we do capture, so all of that imagery we capture in the field.
Yeah.
So we'll have copies of that and you will own that too. So if you do have a need for a sidewalk inventory or something, we pull in that imagery and then we start extracting the assets and the attributes tied to those assets, meaning what's the material type of the sidewalk, what's the good, fair, poor condition. So there is work to be done in terms of developing the inventory, but we don't have to recollect anything. We don't have to remobilize, the van doesn't have to show up. We just pull the imagery that was already captured and post-process it on the back end for those.
Part of you having some info ready for us January, February-ish is going to be to help us with our capital improvement plan.
That is correct, yeah.
That's part of that
That's part of that
section.
deal, yep.
about.
So all of those budget graphs that that I showed you, and even the 5-year plan maps, all of that information, the goal is to have all that available and ready come February. That way, you folks are teed up and prepared for budget discussions, and you know what the current condition of the network is, and even what funds are required to maintain existing conditions or improve them if that's the desire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council, any other questions, comments?
I have one. I do have a question.
Councilwoman Leyva?
So thank you for the presentation. And my question is, after, let's say, we decide on what roads we're going to focus on first and whatnot, do you guys come back again to measure that the work was done correctly as far as like the materials and the thickness and what is required for it to be on a approved standard? Or is that not part of the study?
So what I think you're asking there, so what we're going to develop, we're going to scan the roads. We're going to scan every road that the town maintains, so that we have that in the database. We're going to run the analysis, so we'll have a 5-year plan and all of that. What's not included in the scope is any design level or engineering or inspection work that comes in after the fact. That's not us. That would be another firm that Heather's team works with. But that's where you get into the design level of, these are the mill and overlay candidates. We need to pop cores or understand layer thicknesses so that we can design appropriate rehabilitation there. So we're before that. We're not in that design engineering phase.
And if I could just clarify, with their report, based on the PCI number that they give us, they'll give us the recommendation on what pavement treatment we need to utilize to bring that roadway up. So whether it's a mill and fill, or it's just a micro slurry, or it's just, rejuvenation of oil.
So after the work is complete, then it's up to us to make sure that it was done right and whatnot.
Our inspection team will do that.
Councilwoman?
Thank you for your presentation. So for a town our size, and you showed all of the counties and towns and cities that you've been involved with, maybe just a portion of the towns that you've actually. So I'm assuming that you've done towns our size before.
Oh, absolutely.
So what is the time element involved? Once you get started, maybe you already said, I just missed it.
No. So time element comes in 2 forms. So if we're just talking about the van itself, the collection happens very quickly. So the van drives at posted speed limits. Collection for the town is literally only going to take about 2 weeks to do the entire survey. It's all of the post-processing on the back end. So in terms of having all the data ready, typically it takes about 5 or 6 months. Our target goal right now, if this contract is approved next week, is to have all that budget level information and the prioritized 5-year plan ready by February, so that you folks have it available for budget discussions come March.
So would we see all 5 of these Ghostbusters going around town, or would it just be one?
It'd just be one. Yep. One van will get it done in about 2 weeks. The only time we mobilize more than one vehicle is if we're serving a large network. So for instance, when we did Pima County, they've got about 3,000 miles. We did have 2 vans and a third on standby to do that network, but a town this size, only one is necessary.
Anything else, Council? Sir, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Moving on, item 2B. Ms. Reuter, I believe this is you as well.
All right, so we talked about roadway pavement condition. Now we're going to move into roadway standards and guideline updates. So Public Works has been working diligently with our design consultants, WSP Engineering as well as Lee Engineering, to bring us some conformity on some specific updates. Oh, sorry, can you hear me now? I apologize. Let me squat down here.
Do the same thing.
So I have Scott Omar with WSP Engineering, and I apologize, I completely forgot your name. Amarai with WSP, and they're going to go over the first couple slides, and then when they are done, if you have any questions for them, please feel free to ask. And then I also have Randy here with Lee Engineering, and he'll go over the crosswalk guidance document that we have.
Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Vice Mayor, and members of the council. Thank you guys for letting us be here today. As Heather said, I'm Scott Omer. I'm the Senior Vice President with WSP USA. I oversee all planning and advisory services for Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. Why is a planner here talking about standards? Basically, my project manager came down, wish she couldn't be here today. So I'm the contract owner. I'm here, but we have a great team that worked on this, and we were thrilled to get the opportunity to come to the town of Prescott Valley and talk about, your standards. I think if I can figure out which button to push, is it the one with the arrow on it? There we go. So we have just a couple of slides. We're going to go out of order a little bit. Amara is going to present the first one specifically on the striping standards, and I'll talk about ADA and the other ones. So thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Council. So the town hired WSP to do this analysis and basically to review the town's guidelines and update it to standardize it. So pretty much across the town roadway network, it is consistent striping layout. This is limited to just the pavement marking guidelines. What we did was review what the town currently has. The town ordinances has some guidelines in there. So we looked at those. We looked at the neighboring agencies, the neighboring, what ADOT also has in its roadway. And we came up with a guideline. It's a pretty detailed document, which hopefully you guys have had a chance to look through. But what I would just quickly go over here is the policies and procedures. Actually, it's in front of me. So what we did, the first line item there, the town established these guidelines basically for use of thermoplastic striping across the town. So really all that will be laid out across the town roadways will be thermoplastic pavement marking, as well as recessed pavement marking. Recessed pavement markings are those ones that dip into the ground, so snow plows don't have any issues.
Mark, real quick, just so the council understands and the public that's here, what the thermoplastic striping, what that entails. And this has been one of the issues that we've heard a lot from residents about why does we stripe the roads in Prescott Valley and then it fades away after 2 months? So if you can explain a little bit about just those standards and the difference in use of paint and application.
Sure, sir. So thermoplastic are more durable. So it is kind of like plastic, but it is hot. So the way it's placed out in the field is it's hot mixed. And when they stripe, it bonds much, much better to the pavement than, let's say, tape, than normal stripe, right? So it is more durable, it lasts longer, and when the town needs to restripe, the pavement truck can just go over that, hot mix it, so it goes with a hot, it basically heats up what is there already and just, repaints over it. So it is a much more durable material than the normal stripe that you put out there. So it's not typically use the normal stripe for as a temporary alternative, but this will be much more durable, last longer. And ADOT pretty much uses it in similar weather conditions that the town has. And so So the next line item, this is, it shall be the responsibility of a consultant, developer, or agency preparing the payment marking plans to, first of all, obtain approval from the town engineer and public works director, provide a set of as-built. So once they go out and they do the marking, provide a set of what was actually placed on the roadway for approval and for documentation in the town. And then obviously we've gone over determine the type of material and specifications to be used. And then once it is done, schedule for inspection. So the town inspectors will come inspect and make sure that it is placed appropriately. The other line items that we covered was identifying the guidelines that will be used for this in the striping plan. So what happens is when you come to do any striping within the town, you do have to produce a set of plans that the contractor or whoever does the work will use. So these guidelines determine what that will be. Tells you the width of the pavement marking itself. Also tells you the lane width itself, what it should be. It tells you what the storage lane should be, the minimum guidelines it should be. So it has a whole lot of specifications that are specified in this guideline that whoever comes out to place this pavement marking will adhere to. It will be consistent throughout the town. One of the things we did, we looked at what ADOT does, what Flagstaff does, what similar agencies, in size to the town does. So those were all reflected and taken into account when we prepared this document. And it also tells you on the plan itself that you put together what the plan itself should look like. So different, engineering firms don't come up with different, looking plans. So it tells you what scale it should be, the general notes that should be on the plan. So each set of plan will specify, these guidelines tell you exactly what should be specified across all plan sets. So once it is done and the town engineer looks at it, it is basically consistent throughout the town. So I can go through all these line items, but pretty much that's a summary of what is included in the pavement marking guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we'll go over the ADA guidelines. So the American Disabilities Act is ADA. So what this does, it really prepares town staff, the consultants, and the developers and the public for how you understand where you have acceptable ADA facilities or not. The town currently uses the 2010 ADA guidelines, not uncommon. That's used in many places. And that applies to all new construction or anytime you can make modification to the existing facilities, generally the crossings themselves. And that's outlined in the existing town manual, the town design manuals. In order to make this happen and to implement it, you'd go out and document any of the existing deficiencies. So you're going to inventory your existing facilities when you're doing your work. You document if they meet standards or not, if there's deficiencies. You would prioritize those with public input, town's input, developers' input, to make sure that they're identified and understand when you would need to make those replacements. When you actually have that under place, you would use the prioritization method of identifying when you would replace or bring any of these up to standards. You do those based on whether it's new construction, an alteration to an existing facility. So new construction, if you're going to go in and build new sidewalks, new crosswalks, new ADA ramps, or if you're going to make a correction or a reconstruction to one. And then last, maintenance. Generally with maintenance activities, you're not required to make those repairs immediately, but if you're going to install a new one or make a alteration to it, general rule of thumb is if you touch it, you fix it. But you would do that in the instance using the town's new policy and standards to do so. This is pretty common across most jurisdictions. ADA standards and guidelines is one where they change on a fairly regular basis, so it's difficult to always stay on top of those. Next slide is about pavement cuts and horizontal bores inside of the town's rights-of-way. The town will adopt the City of Prescott Section 7.12 for pavement cuts with the following changes. There should be no open trenching or cuts in the pavement on public streets with the paved surfaces less than 5 years old. The exception to that would have to be made by the town engineer. City of Prescott is also 5 years. It would have a detail that modified to section 200Q-1 revision X17, which we're going to show. It's at the next slide. The City of Prescott standards, trench and backfill surface replacements detailed, and then the town will adopt these City of Prescott standards. So it's the same standard that is in the region that's out there today. Any work within the existing town's right-of-way would be required to have a permit. So again, that's not a change to your existing conditions.
Mr. Mayor, if I, just again, the importance of this. So take, for example, we're spending a lot of money, taxpayer money, on redoing Glassford Hill Road. The worst thing ever is a utility or separate contractor comes in and says, well, we need to, get a new line across the road. And then they, from that image that you see right there, they cut across that pavement section, brand new asphalt. It never goes back in perfectly. So now you'll have a, bump while you're driving, and it just gets worse over time. So this really tries to protect your pavement sections over a longer period of time. There is cost implications. So when someone like a utility has to do work, they may have to bore under. That is very common across the state of Arizona, where utilities have to go in and bore under before that. Beyond the 5 years, then there's more flexibility with it because the pavement's older. But we definitely want to make sure we protect that brand new asphalt across the community.
In general, this trenching and backfill, so this standard itself talks about, you're going to identify what the existing pavement structural section is. You're going to make sure that that same pavement structural section is replaced with all the subgrade. You're going to have the appropriate tape in to mark where the water line or the gas line or whatever the utility is. And then you're going to make sure that it's sound. So all of these are going to have their own specific standard for that. I mean, we could go through every single line, but that's probably not something that's that important. But I do believe that what we've done with developing these specific guidelines, it brings us to a point now where it's consistent across the board, and it's also consistent with your neighboring communities. Question, sir?
No, sir, I just want to say that consistency is obviously a good thing and something we've lacked for a while. So I appreciate your efforts and appreciate your presentation. Vice Mayor?
So did that conclude your presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So am I to understand, Heather, that they have been amending our Public Works design manual? They've already done this.
WSP has been
Yes.
amending. So phase one with WSP was to look at an overall high level and some key elements that have really caused angst within the town, such as the pavement cuts, such as the inconsistency in pavement markings, such as not using thermoplastic for pavement markings. So this is phase one. So phase two, they will be looking at an overall I can hand you a book. These are all our standards to the developers. I can hand this to my team internally. This is what we follow. So this is just the first step in creating that overall transparency and book that, we may refer to other details from other agencies, but we want it all housed in one place instead of you go look at MAG for this detail, you go look at Quad Cities for this detail. We want it just one place within the town so they can just open it. There's no question.
So they're ultimately, and I like what the gentleman said about having a standard map look. And so we'll have that throughout as well. And that will be in our, I'm calling it a design manual because that's the planner in me, but an engineering specification. But then we'll do that also with street crossing standards and sidewalk standards
Correct.
and manhole standards. So
Correct.
that anybody comes in when they build new roads, all of those standards will have a book
Yes,
with all of that in there.
that is the intent.
And we don't necessarily have all of that in one place right now.
We absolutely do not.
And that is our goal.
Yes.
And we're going to try to the best of our ability to coordinate as much as we can with our neighboring jurisdictions so that we can coordinate
Absolutely. So the city of Prescott is actually redoing all of their standards right now. They just kicked that off, and our utilities team has been involved. They've been looking at the utility standards first. John Latier, now that he's on our team, he's going to be at all those meetings as well, and hopefully find some consistency across this area. So that way, when a contractor, or developer, or designer is in this region, they're designing to the same standards across the entire region.
So what they just presented to us, we've already paid for. Their
Correct.
next phases are in our budget?
It is in our budget, and I have not brought that forward yet.
Okay.
Yes.
So then we're going to amend their contract or extend their contract to do the next phases to complete that book.
Correct. We are hashing out the scope of work right now because what we don't want to lose track of is we want to make sure that we are wrapping in what West Engineering is doing.
Correct.
And we have that all the way across the board. I mean, as simple as what streetlights are we going to use? You know, we want to make sure we have every little detail that we can. So it's going to be a cross coordination among several consultants.
Everything that a road covers, the culverts, the drainage.
Anything in the
everything.
right of way.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, and so are we saying 6 months, 9 months? How soon can I have that book in front of me, you think?
Oh, I'm guessing it's probably going to be a good while. I don't know exactly. It's going to be a process, and I always tell people this. I know we want things fast.
Right.
But we want to do the planning side first to make sure we're not tweaking it on the back end. So we'll go as expeditiously as possible, but we want to get it right.
I'm just excited that we're finally going to have something like this, and it'll be electronic, it'll be
Yes,
on.
it will be on our website.
Excuses why we don't have this on the plan and why we're not consistent and all that
Correct.
when something gets to us on the dais.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Councilwoman Leyva?
I have a quick question. How much longer does the thermoplastic paint last versus the regular?
It lasts about 3 years.
3 years longer.
Well, 3 years total. The paint right now that we're getting is lasting maybe 3 to 4 months.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
So that's the difference.
Yes, it is a huge difference.
Okay, so and then, you know, like long-term investment is like way better.
Well, it reduces our cost to go out there twice a year and refreshen our paint. So we won't have to touch that roadway for 3 years.
And what about the equipment that is used to apply this paint?
Similar as a regular paint machine, striping machine, they have thermoplastic long line striping machines.
So this is more common in most cities?
Almost all cities in Arizona are all thermoplastic. Typically, you only use paint for the first 30 days after a new roadway to absorb the oils, and then you come back with a thermoplastic.
So it's heat resistant and all that, which is,
Correct.
I'm sure.
Yep.
Councilman Schumacher?
Is there a way to pre-plan for, instead of going back and digging up something to then trench across, is there a way to pre-plan, like putting down conduit beforehand?
Well,
for-
that's a great question. So we are currently in Public Works developing a townwide CIP process where we are now bringing our stakeholders in at the front end, which include all the utility companies, internal, external stakeholders. So that way they know projects are coming well in advance, so they can get their utilities out of the way. They can put sleeves in our design plans. So we are changing our direction and heading in that direction. But great question.
Thank you.
Anyone else, council? Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. The last part of this presentation is Randy with Lee Engineering and its crosswalk guidance document, which we absolutely needed. So, Randy?
Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Randy Dittburner, and I work with Lee Engineering. We're a traffic engineering firm, and we've done a fair bit of work with the town over the years. It's by far my favorite place to work. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today to talk with you about crosswalk guidance. As you may know, Lee Engineering prepared a document for the town talking about whether and how to mark crosswalks. And those are two critical questions, and they're very different questions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those questions in a moment. But I want to start by just talking about what a crosswalk is. The Arizona Revised Statutes has a two-part definition for the word crosswalk. Part one is if you're at an intersection, there are crosswalks on every leg, whether they are marked or not. And a pedestrian has the same rights and responsibilities in an unmarked crosswalk as they do in a marked crosswalk. So at an intersection, we don't have to put down crosswalk markings to provide those benefits to pedestrians. The second part of the definition in Arizona law is you can have a crosswalk away from an intersection, but if so, it has to be marked. And so you have to provide crosswalk markings in order for pedestrians to get the benefits of a crosswalk in Arizona law. So I want you to think for a moment about this intersection right out here on Lakeshore, where Skoog Boulevard kind of intersects on the west side of the circle here. If you keep going straight across on Skoog, you end up on Main Street. Everybody with me on this intersection? So that intersection is a 4-leg intersection, and so it has 4 crosswalks, 1 crosswalk on every leg. Right now, only the north leg crosswalk is marked, but there are crosswalks unmarked on the other 3 legs of the intersection. But if you think about that intersection, there's 2 kinds of crosswalks at that intersection. The crosswalks that go parallel to Lakeshore, that is if you're crossing Skoog Boulevard or if you're crossing Main Street, those crosswalks are called controlled crosswalks because the traffic that crosses those crosswalks has a stop sign. And so vehicles that are conflicting with pedestrians are stop controlled. The crosswalks that go across Lakeshore are uncontrolled crosswalks because the vehicles that are traveling along Lakeshore have no stop sign, no yield sign, and obviously it's much more difficult for a pedestrian to cross in an uncontrolled crosswalk than it is in a controlled crosswalk. So a stop sign, traffic signal, those are all different types of controls that exist at these controlled crosswalks that I was mentioning. And there's a real difference between controlled crosswalks and uncontrolled crosswalks when it comes to the decision about whether to mark and how to mark a crosswalk. Controlled crossings, the research is showing that there's no particular safety advantage one way or the other, whether the crosswalk is marked or not. There is no study that's required. The town can use its judgment freely to either mark or not mark crosswalks at controlled locations. Oftentimes, agencies will mark controlled crosswalks when they provide access to schools or parks, or if it's a high-volume, multi-use path with lots of bicycle and pedestrian activity to call attention to that crossing. But as I said, the research is showing no particular safety advantage one way or the other to markings. The reason we're here today and the fundamental issue that is really important about crosswalks is when it comes to uncontrolled crosswalks, because the research is showing that at uncontrolled locations, crosswalk markings do not universally improve traffic safety, which is really difficult concept for me as a traffic engineer to grasp. I want to go out and make things safer, and usually when you add signs and you add markings, that's what happens. You make things safer. But in the case of crosswalks, that's not always true. And that's why we need to provide some guidance to the town to help them make consistent decisions about where is a good idea to mark a crosswalk and where is a good idea not to mark a crosswalk. So with that said, this document talks about these 2 questions. The first question, whether to mark a crosswalk. And again, our goal is to minimize the number of pedestrian crashes. And so we're taking advantage of the latest research that's been done throughout the country, looking at what sort of crosswalk marking patterns and strategies are improving pedestrian safety the most. And we've incorporated all of that research into this document that we've prepared for the town. And so there's a flow chart and there's a worksheet in this document that looks at things like how far away is the nearest crossing, what is the sight distance available for pedestrians, between pedestrians and vehicles, what's the crash history like at that intersection, what's the speed limit and what's the amount of traffic. These are all kinds of questions that are considered in this process. And once the results are once you kind of work your way through the process, the methodology will make a recommendation either to mark the crosswalk or not to mark the crosswalk. And so that's question 1. That's part 1 of this document. Question 2 is, how should the crosswalk be marked? And the reason we need this part of the document is that on high-speed streets, high-volume streets, really wide streets, crosswalk markings alone are not enough to improve pedestrian safety. You need other traffic control devices at the same time. So we are we're making some recommendations to the town based on the characteristics of the street, what kinds of traffic control devices are appropriate at a particular crossing location once we've made a decision that markings are desirable. So the first part of this process is to determine what we're calling a tier number. And we've designated 6 tiers of streets based on the characteristics of the street, the amount of traffic, the speed limit, the number of through lanes that pedestrians have to cross, and critically, the type of median, whether there's a raised median or whether there's a two-way left turn lane or whether it's a simple double yellow center line. All of those affect how easy it is for pedestrians to cross the street. And so we're taking those into account as we decide what sorts of traffic control devices are appropriate. So we're going to determine a tier number, and then we've provided a table to the town that recommends the traffic control devices that are appropriate for that tier. For instance, in addition to crosswalk markings, there may be pedestrian warning signs, both at the crossing and in advance. There might be yield lines. You've seen those on some multi-lane approaches here in the town and elsewhere. We might recommend a raised median if there is space for it and if there's an opportunity to make that work. A rectangular rapid flashing beacon, which I know there's one right out here at Lakeshore and Lake Valley, and I'm sure you're familiar with that one. Or as we get to the very, very widest, very highest volume, very highest speed streets, a pedestrian hybrid beacon might be necessary, which really actually stops traffic to get the most comfort and safety for crossing pedestrians. So a critical element that we want to communicate with these guidelines is we only want to provide the markings once all the rest of the traffic control devices are in place. So sometimes it might be tempting, oh, we got a request for a crosswalk. Let's go put the markings in today and then follow up in a few months with the signs and the signals or whatever else is needed. But we don't want to do it that way because if the crosswalk markings are there by themselves, that's a potential safety issue. So we'll do the upfront work first, program money if necessary to install these other devices. And once those other devices are in place, then we can come back and put those markings in. So that's a very brief summary of this document, but I would be very happy to go into more details or answer questions if I have some. Thanks.
Council, we have any questions? Councilman Leyva?
Great presentation. And my question is your firm looking at other markings such as like the frontage roads, not to block the traffic, or this is just for pedestrians?
One of the reasons that Prescott Valley is a really fun place for me to work is there's a lot of interesting streets in the town. There's a lot of issues. And this particular project that we worked on deals only with crosswalk markings, but we would be very happy to get involved in other issues as well. So work with Heather and call us up. We'll be glad to.
Mr. Davison?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I just wanted to highlight what really this is a culmination of many months of work, and it really started with the council. When we had the kickoff to the council's strategic plan 2 years ago, we'll be doing an update this year. This was one of the big issues that the council was concerned about in trying to provide, connectivity across our community, enhance safety for pedestrians. And the town historically had been basically paying to have every intersection studied whenever someone requested a crossing. That starts to add up to a lot of money. So again, with the direction of the council and working with Lee Engineering, these standards, this is huge. This provides that guidance for our teams to be able to make sure as we do road improvements that we have literally consistency with all of our crossings across the entire town. So this is a milestone moment, and we've spent, invested a lot over the last couple of years in putting in crosswalks. and really appreciate now that we'll have a standard that we can apply consistently across the community.
Councilwoman?
And another quick note, and I know there's a lot of work that you guys been doing, but Gilbert and Heather, I mean, you guys have done amazing on bringing on, different firms and providing in such a short period of time ideas and initiatives, and being so proactive on this is just impressive. So thank you, Heather and Gilbert, and all of you guys.
Sir?
All right, thank you.
Moving on to item 2C, Town Facilities Assessment. Ms. Reuter, I believe you're up on that.
Thank you. Sorry, we will run through this really quick, but I just wanted to say thank you, Councilwoman, but it was actually our entire team, so it's all of Public Works, so I appreciate the accolades, but my team's here and they've done a great job. So moving into the facilities assessment, I could not have done this without my team. I have Bill here, who's our CIP project manager, Josh, who's our facilities manager, and Ron, our deputy director. And so part of Public Works is to look at all of our facilities. So we are going to look at just 3 parts. I'll run through it quickly because I know Donna has a lot going on her plate as well. But the first part is just, we looked at all of the facilities that the town owns and leases out. Is it the up button? Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. So real quick, we looked at all our facilities and we rated them on the condition. And the rating system basically, overall high level, we looked at the roof, we looked at the major systems, plumbing, electrical, HVAC. We looked at any remodel, what was done to the building, and then we also looked at the age of the building. So when you see the rating system, that is basically, it's a rating system A, B, C. We have a building that's an F, so we'll talk about that a little bit. But this is Boys and Girls Club. They are doing great. They're at a B. We don't recommend changing it. It's a great option for the community, and they have a great lease. So am I not pushing the right? Oh, there we go. This one was kind of a head scratcher. We were like, we didn't know we own this building, but we do own this building. So the building condition is unknown. Again, great for the community. It's for Head Start. So we really don't have any input on that as well. The old City Hall, from what I'm told, this was the old City Hall, Town Hall site. Building conditions, our team went out. They look to be very, very well kept. We gave them a C, retained for current use for the community. And then the fairgrounds out there. And they provide so much recreation for our community. So it's another one. The lease expires in 2026. I don't think we know the condition of that building because there's such a hodgepodge of buildings out there. So we don't have a true condition report on that one. And then we have Casa Senior Center, which is great for the community. And that one, we've done a lot of renovations. We changed out the HVAC units. We've been working on exterior paint in the parking lot. And so that building's a C+ at this point. So that's kind of high level. So now we'll talk about town-owned facilities that we actually occupy. And the reason we wanted to look at this is over the next several years, we realized quite quickly, we're going to outgrow our town's facilities at the rate of growth that we are currently growing. So we looked at Civic Center. The building condition, C+. We're doing some remodel right now to add capacity to the 3rd and 4th floor, and next year will be the 1st and 2nd floor. So we want to keep the current function. It's about 82,000 square foot building. First floor is courts. And over on the bottom left, you'll see who occupies this space, and then you'll see also our challenges, which will outgrow this space in about 1 to 2 years. Unfortunately for Josh's team, he got booted out of the 3rd floor, and facilities is now on the 1st floor because we ran out of space on the 3rd floor. But you'll see there's a couple areas that we can actually expand. There's only one future growth for office, even after remodel. 2nd floor, we're in the similar situation. We have development services, neighborhood services, utilities, customer services there. After remodel, we will only have 4 workstations, and I don't believe we have any additional offices for growth. So we're looking at 1 to 2 years to outgrow that space. Third floor, Public Works, Utilities, HR is moving down to the third floor, IT and GIS after the remodel. HR, they have no room for expansion, even after the remodel. The rest of us, we have maybe one office and a couple of workstations. So we're looking at 1 to 2 year to outgrow that space as well. Fourth floor, they're in the same condition after the remodel. Town management team, no room for expansion. Economic development, no room for expansion. Legal, they're sitting pretty good. They have 2 offices, so they need to hire some people. Finance, they're pretty good. They have 1 office and 4 or 3 workstations. So we took the average because of that, and so we have 2 to 3 years of growth in that area. And keep in mind, even though we say certain departments, there's always the option to move cross-departmental to find space. So we do have that option as well. Not ideal, but we can do it. Police department is probably our best right now. They are at a B condition. They have that whole second floor, and they also have a lot of space internally. If we remodeled, we could probably get them another 8 to 10 years. I know Chief is here and he's doubting me, but I think we can do it. Okay, so now what's the question? How do we plan for future growth? And future growth is gonna come quickly, so we need to look far in advance as possible. We're looking at the NAU, so the library. So we would not touch this side of the library at all. And I think you all are aware that the other side, community services relocated over there from the 3rd floor of Civic Center. What we're recommending when NAU, it's one option, when NAU moves out next summer, we could potentially relocate neighborhood services over there, whereby opening up capacity for the rest of the building over at Civic Center. That's just one option. I mean, we're gonna explore a bunch of options, but we do have some options moving forward. So this is kind of a depiction of what you'll see here on the 1st floor. Neighborhood services would just take over the front end, but keep in mind, they would be at capacity if they moved over there. As soon as they moved in, there would be no room for growth. On the other end would still be community services, and we'd have to remodel that atrium to add additional office space, which would be taking away some space that they use potentially for classes in that area right now. So there's a trade-off on all of these. 2nd floor, we would remodel that as well, and that would remain community services. We could probably get another 4 workstations up there, but then we're now taking away their conference area. So it's a balance sheet. Public Works and Park Complex. This is the one out where our operations and maintenance people are off of Robert out there. There's 3 buildings. What road is that? Is it Long
Mesa.
Long Mesa, sorry. Off of Long Mesa. There's 3 buildings out there. All of them are probably an F. Very sad state of affairs. We have 3 departments crunched in out there on a 4-acre site. And those buildings are old. There's no room for storage, there's no room for equipment, there's not even room for the staff to park in the front. And we've even reconfigured the parking lot. So long-range plans, we're always looking long-range. What can we do, what can we do? Options, we look at potential state land in an industrial area for future expansion. Grab up, 10 to 20 acres so we can move all the operations out there. Or we grab up 10 acres and move, one of the departments out there and leave one of the departments at the Long Mesa. So we're looking all over what we can do. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. This is their site. Clearly we need to clean up who owns what, because there's like 16 parcels that create one site, and it should be one parcel. So we'll work on that on the back end. And then another option that was brought up, Josh brought up, which I thought was a great option until we did a little bit more digging into it, was adding a modular building here in the parking lot where the fleet sits. To build that, we're looking at over $2 million, and that's a modular building with 8-foot-high ceilings. And so, is it an option? Yes, it's an option. Is it zoned that we could do it? Yes. Is it the facade that we want to do here? That's up to your direction. You let us know and we'll go whatever direction you want us to go. But that's going to cost over $2 million for the building plus a site civil, which is the expansion of water, sewer, electric. My understanding is we're built on clay underneath all of that, so over-Xing and then putting back for a solid foundation. So that could get costly. Here are just some examples of what the modulars could look like. So when you think of modulars, you think of, square, rectangle. But you can add facades, you can have metal roofs, you can add an entrance. And so our thought process is we could move development services out there. We could relocate utilities from the 3rd floor down to the 1st floor to be with customer services at Civic Center, which would then open up capacity for all the other departments within the Civic Center. So this is another option to look at. Another option is purchase an existing building. There's very few existing buildings out there. There is that old charter school on Florentine that's up for sale right now, which would be great for community services. They have a rec center. We could potentially put a pool outside eventually or something like that. So looking at that, which would then open up this whole NAU side, which other departments could move in. So we're just trying to think outside the box, and we're kind of looking for your all's direction on your thoughts, not necessarily thou shall do, but ideas, thoughts, questions, anything like that to help us make sure we're going down the right path as we continue to look forward. The other option is always a purchase or lease. I don't know, as a town, we typically don't want to lease facilities if we don't have to. And looking within the town of PV, there wasn't anything large enough to lease anyways, so that's kind of off the table. And then with that, questions, we'd be more than happy. I have my team here if you have any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we have a lot of information to kind of consume, and I think when we have our strat plan meeting next month, it's something that we can certainly be discussing for the future, as well as with our future budget coming up too. So
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
awesome. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next up, Ms. Kennedy, update zoning code revision. Welcome, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Mayor Palguda, Vice Mayor Hunt, and council members. Donna Kennedy here to present to you 2 zoning code amendments that we'd like your input and direction on. One is the amendment for affordable attainable housing units. The Attainable Housing Task Force recommended that we look at ADUs and try to expand upon what our guidelines are for in our zoning code. We have hired to collaborate with Mr. Frank Cassidy. He's here tonight. He will be presenting our staff findings and collaboration to see what your input would be for the guidelines that we have for this topic. And then I will be presenting on another, it's development services and how our applications are handled and processed. We feel that during this time of high growth and densities, et cetera, that we need to alter it and re-examine what we're looking at, working with the developers. So when we meet with the community, we have more information in front of us. This town, it's good news, but we also have answers that we need to present to the community about the growth that's occurring. And for us to send staff out, we want to be knowledgeable. We want to be on top of what is going on and how it affects the region. So first, we'll start off with our ADUs and what the guidelines will be and what we're proposing for your review to see if we've covered everything. And I'll bring Frank Cassidy up for his segment of this.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Frank Cassidy here. Thank you for having me back. As you can see from the agenda item, generally it's about the code update. And as you've seen me present before on the overall writing of the code, and that process is happening. There's a little flavor of it, of our work in the materials you have. There's that colorful last attachment, and that just sort of gives you a little piece of the puzzle. That's the work that we do to look at the current uses in commercial and industrial zones, trying to now encapsulate that into a much smaller table. The table that comes out of that is actually a half a page. So what comes out of 20 or 30 pages of existing code is now being converted to a very small thing. So that gives you an idea of what that's about, but that's not what we're really here to talk about. I just want to let you know that process is happening. It's a very large process. The current code is about 240 pages. We're expecting it'll probably be around slightly over 100 pages by the time we're done. But nevertheless, that process is ongoing. In the meantime, we've had some requests to look at some other things sooner, one of which is accessory dwelling units, which we'll talk about in great detail tonight. But also, you know, you've had people present to you on things like group homes. We are looking separately at that. The town has hired John Palladini. He's the former city attorney for Prescott, who they tackled that issue. And so he'll be coming forward with a proposal probably before the end of the year on that. There have also been people who've gotten up to talk about noise questions. So the noise ordinance is also being separately looked at. The legal staff, Ivan Legler and Carol Cornell primarily have been working on that. So they've been doing a lot of work. They've got an internal draft of that. But what we're here to talk about in great detail, as I said, are these accessory dwelling units, because the question came up, well, should we just look at these when we're doing the entire code, in which case you wouldn't really have an opportunity to incorporate these ADUs into your community probably for another year or so, or how about just looking at them separately? Because they are kind of they're a very interesting but possibly contentious element. So it's probably good to look at this separately. The overall code is not really as contentious. It's mostly a matter of grinding out the code and making it simpler, easier to read and understand and apply. But this is a new concept, these accessory dwelling units. And so we wanted to maybe bring these to you separately to look at these. So what are they? I mean, basically what they are is a second dwelling unit on a single-family residential lot, SFR, single-family residential lot. So essentially what you do is you end up converting a single unit dwelling unit into two dwelling units because you allow this accessory dwelling unit. It can have its own kitchen, additional bedrooms, living rooms, bathrooms, everything. It's accessory, so it has to have a primary residence. It's a government allowed thing. So if you have private regulations like homeowners association restrictions, covenants, things like that that prohibit these, it doesn't matter what you allow, they'll still be prohibited by those covenants. So, and most of your community is covered by covenants. So no matter what you do with ADUs, you're not really going to see them in most areas of your town. It's only going to be in the areas that they don't have covenants prohibiting the ADUs that you're going to potentially see them. So you might ask, well, how is it that we're even talking about these ADUs? Well, throughout the state, we've seen these ADU discussions happening primarily because over the last couple of years, you've had legislation coming forward where the state legislature has been trying to place mandatory zoning requirements on cities and towns, basically by right zoning they've been trying to adopt. So for 2 years in a row, the state legislature has been considering legislation that said, for example, last year they had a draft statute that said, hey, if you have 4,000 square feet, you're permitted to have a single family residence anywhere in the state of Arizona if you're in a city or town. So if your zoning ordinance has a 36,000 square foot minimum lot size, all of a sudden that legislation would have converted that single lot into 8 potential lots. So to get around those state mandates, potential state mandates, there began to be a process that the legislature went through called the Housing Supply Study Committee. And I know the mayor and vice mayor, you went to at least one of those meetings. I remember seeing you at the meeting in Sedona. And basically what came out of those meetings was, hey, we need to create more units. You know, there's not enough available housing in Arizona. We need to create more housing. And you heard all kinds of testimony about why there isn't enough housing. A large amount of it was testimony saying that probably the short-term rental statute, which mandates that local governments allow short-term rentals, caused investor purchase of every available house, making them unavailable for regular folks who want to live in communities. And so all of a sudden, housing prices went up and availability went down. Anyway, through that process, the chairman of that Housing Supply Study Committee, Chairman Kaiser, came forward with legislation. I think I just turned the darn thing off instead of changing the page. I'm sorry. He came forward and sponsored legislation in the 2023 session, and pretty much every piece of legislation that was proposed included ADUs. ADUs were discussed during the Housing Supply Study Committee meetings. Flagstaff and City of Tucson were explaining how their programs worked. The Housing Supply Study Committee liked that concept, and so it was included in all of the different bills. And basically, the bill that was eventually negotiated even with the League, so the League of Arizona Cities and Towns sat down with Senator Kaiser, and they came up with a compromise bill that included a mandate for ADUs in communities 50,000 or larger. So that would include Prescott Valley. And it said you couldn't even require additional parking for these ADUs. But that legislation did have a little bit of help in it. It did say it expressly authorized local governments to require that there be at least 3-month leases for these ADUs so that they couldn't be used for short-term rental. So when we had when there was the meeting back on May the 25th, right here concerning the attainable housing, remember you had the Attainable Housing Task Force came in and provided their final report on May the 25th. When that report was given to you, all of that legislation I was talking about was still alive. And we believed, at that point that ADUs were in fact going to be stuffed down your throat, excuse the expression, and everybody else's over 50,000. Well, as it turned out, a few weeks later, June the 12th, the bill ended up getting killed for various political reasons. So as we sit here today, you don't have an obligation to require ADUs. So we thought we were going to have that requirement, but as we sit today, you don't have that. On the other hand, you don't have legislation that expressly gives you authority to limit, to require leases on ADUs and things like that too. So there aren't some of the benefits that come with the legislation, but at least you're not required to do them in any event. So nevertheless, recognizing that ADUs are sort of the low-hanging fruit for getting more units in a community, we did prepare a draft ordinance for your feedback, and it's in the materials. The red line version, comparing it to what your current ordinance has, is in the materials. Right now, your ordinance allows the traditional kind of guest house for, mother-in-law suite. If you're related, you can have a guest house in your backyard if you have a pretty large lot. You have to meet the backyard setback of the main building, though. So, it's pretty restrictive to be able to actually put a guest house in under your current code, and it cannot be used by strangers. It has to be used by a family member. And with an ADU, it can be used by basically anybody. It can be used by a completely separate family. It can be rented out separately and whatnot. So it does allow separate use. The way we've written ours, it requires that the main single family residence be owner occupied, number one, and that the lot itself that has the ADU has to have at least 10,000 square feet. You might have read in the newspaper that the city of Phoenix just this week adopted their own ADU ordinance. They don't have a minimum lot size for ADUs. They let the setback requirements for the individual zone restrict, whether you're going to be able to have an ADU on your lot. But in our draft, we put it as 10,000 square feet or larger, recognizing that, you probably need a decent sized lot to be able to fit, especially a detached ADU in the backyard, which is where they would be permitted under our ordinance. By the way, an ADU doesn't have to be detached. It can also be part of the main house. A lot of home builders these days are building multi-generational houses where they'll put 2 kitchens, basically 2 homes under one roof. So the idea being that if my kids would put up with me moving in with them, then I could move in with them. Well, under the traditional multi-generational house, it needs to be a relative. But if you have an ADU ordinance, like we're proposing here, that kind of multi-generational house can actually have 2 completely unrelated families in the main house. If you wanted, you could actually have slightly different rules for when the ADU is included in the main residence versus when it's a detached. So in our ordinance, we're proposing that you have at least 10,000 square feet for your lot if you want to have an ADU. You might say, well, if it's part of the main building, we don't care what size the main, the lot is. As I said, we've said you have to have 10,000, but that's something for you to think about. Another issue is in our draft, we recognize that this isn't necessarily going to be popular. I have to tell you that, all of a sudden, some folks who are used to having single family homes in their entire neighborhood, if they see a second home go up in the backyard right behind their lot, they might, folks in the neighborhood might not like that much. When I first started doing zoning 40 years ago, my mentor told me that basically what zoning is neighbors hating neighbors. If you understand that if neighbors got along with everything, you wouldn't need zoning, right? But that's what zoning is. Neighbors get upset about what their neighbor does, and this is an example of that kind of potential problem. When you see that somebody next to you all of a sudden has 2 families where the subdivision plat anticipated there was going to be 1 family, that can create some angst in a neighborhood. So we put in the ordinance a provision that says you need either the consent of adjacent property owners, or you have to go through a process, a use permit process, to get approval of the ADU. So one of the pieces of feedback that we're looking at from you is, do you want to keep that, or do you want to just say, nah, let's just let them have them by right? If you allow them by right, keep in mind, you could have people a little unhappy with you under certain circumstances. Who knows? If they're detached, they've got to be in the backyard. If they're in the R1 MH, which is the manufactured housing district, it has to be a manufactured housing unit. If it's in any other district, it's got to be a stick-built home or a factory-built home, which means it's basically built to building code standards. It's not, under our draft, we're not allowing RVs to be used, no park models or anything like that. We are also requiring that they meet all of your normal building code requirements. You get snowfall here, so your normal building code requirement here is to have a 30 pounds per square foot roof load that you can meet. And we're carrying that into the ADUs, also 115 mile an hour wind requirements, things like that some of these lesser built units would not be able to withstand. So you are going to have a pretty beefy, quite a solid detached structure if you follow our draft. So sort of as a little bit of a summary, keep in mind an ADU is a second independent residence on a single-family lot. The draft that we have presented to you by right would essentially allow double the density without a rezoning. So that's something to keep in mind. Ours requires one additional parking space. Remember, the legislation that was drafted said you can't require any additional parking, but in recognition of some of the parking issues in town, the feeling was, hey, if you're going to have an ADU, you need to have an additional parking space. That's also something if you, the council feels that you don't really want that, it'd be nice to hear that from you. Our draft also says that short-term rental of these ADUs is prohibited. Whether that withstands state law, since we don't have the grant of that authority through the draft legislation that didn't get passed. Our ordinance says that. Flagstaff and Phoenix, the way they carry that forward is they require a covenant. A person who wants an ADU, they say, look, if you want an ADU, you have to sign a restrictive covenant and record it against your property that the city can enforce, that where you simply accept that you're going to only rent it for 3 months or less. We didn't actually put that in our ordinance, but that would be something that if you wanted to have that, we could add that to it. There's also, the current draft is completely silent about whether you have to pay extra impact fees for an ADU. And we've had some internal discussions that can make it much less affordable, obviously. If you have a ADU and you have to pay $10,000 or whatever for the various impact fees, the feeling was, the reason we didn't put it in is it, to some extent, is going to depend on whether somebody wants a separate water and sewer connection to that unit, which would probably trigger the separate impact fees. But anyway, we didn't say anything about that, but if you have feedback on that, we'd be interested in hearing that. So some of the particular questions or the things that we'd be interested in your feedback on is whether we go ahead with this now, with these ADUs now. If you say, yeah, let's go ahead and pick this low-hanging fruit and get more units in town right now, or maybe you wait until there's more clarifying legislation at some point in the future. Senator Kaiser actually, he ended up resigning when his bill didn't get passed. So, obviously he's not going to be the one pushing it, but other housing people have sort of promised to keep the flame alive. So I think we can expect future legislation, and some of it might help you and might help to actually wait to see what the future legislation is. On the other hand, if you do wait, then there's that much more time when you're having, the housing crisis, essentially, the lack of housing that you're currently facing. So that's the sort of balancing that you need. Are you okay keeping this idea of the consent of the neighboring property owners, or do you want to make it permitted as a matter of right? Are you okay keeping the additional parking space, or do you want to say, let's just let the ADU exist without an additional parking space? And do you want to keep the short-term rental prohibition? Do you want to add the covenant to it? There's the impact fee question. And then also, I certainly at the Attainable Housing Task Force, one of the longest presentations was by somebody who wanted to wheel in small units into the backyard as ADUs. We don't allow that. Under our draft ordinance, as you can see in your materials, we require that it be placed on a permanent foundation. So, one of the things, that you could tell us today is, hey, lighten up, Cassidy. Let the people roll in a unit if you want. We think that's not a good idea, actually, but, it does make it more affordable. But from our perspective, that's something you can always change in the future if you want to ease the requirements going down the road. Our fear is that there's going to be some initial, negative reaction to these ADUs, and we're trying to soften that as much as possible. So in our ordinance, we're requiring them to be placed on a permanent foundation. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you might have or any feedback or comments.
Vice Mayor?
Well, I have a lot of questions and comments, and so I don't know if you want to do that now or if you want me to submit them later. I am a firm believer that this is going to come back up probably by House Member Toma. I heard he's probably going to be the one that carries it. Excuse me. I would like to see us do something like this. I don't think that every house in Prescott Valley that's allowed to do this is going to do it. I think most homes are not, like my home. I live in Quailwood, so I wouldn't be able to do it, but my home, there's no way we could get to the backyard. We'd have to get a big crane to lift it up to take it over. And so there's a lot of topography that would prohibit people to even put it in their backyard, let alone them having smaller lots than 10,000 square feet. So I don't think there's going to be a big run on people bringing in accessory dwelling units. I think that they're a good idea for people to have a unit in their backyard, because I think it is another way to provide more attainable housing. I think 1,000 square feet is probably on the larger side. I don't know what Phoenix and other places did, but that seems kind of large to me.
That's a maximum. I mean,
No, but I
excuse
still
to
think
interrupt.
that seems kind of big.
In city of Phoenix, it's 10% of the lot size once you get over 10,000 square feet of lot. So if your lot is smaller than 10,000 square feet, you can have up to 1,000 square feet. But it also has to be no more than 75% of the size of the main house in Phoenix. So in other words, if you had like a 1,400 square foot house on a 7,000 square foot lot in Phoenix, you could have 1,000 square foot, up to 1,000 square foot ADU. By the way, almost all ADUs are actually in the range of like 450 square feet. That's, yeah.
Seems fairly large, but
Yeah.
anyway. So I think that because we're going to be forced to look at this anyway, it might be a good idea to look at it. But then my question is, in your professional opinion, and I appreciate that you've been involved in all this, if we go ahead and put some of this in it and we have more restrictions in there than what the legislature comes through, then we just have to go through and amend it if
Correct.
it would get approved. I'd like to be a jurisdiction that says, hey, lay off of us because we've been working on this, because that's kind of the flag we've been waving since our attainable housing did meet. So I would like to look at it, and with regard to looking at asking adjacent properties if you can have them in your backyard, we don't really do that in any other project.
No.
And then the whole use permit idea and going to Board of Adjustments, that's something I asked you to look at a year ago.
Right.
And not letting use permits go to Board of Adjustments anymore. And so that's something that I really don't, I want you to bring to council, because I don't think those should go to Board of Adjustments.
Right.
So
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor Hunt, actually in the draft, as it has been written by me and not necessarily surviving through any staff review because it hasn't really hit that level yet, but that has been rewritten in the current draft, and it doesn't go to the Board of Adjustment for use permits. And by the way, the use permit would only be, that would come out if you eliminated the neighbor consent requirement. In other words, the use permit only comes into play if the consent requirement stays in the ordinance and if the neighbors don't consent, then you need to go through the use permit.
and I think the whole idea of making it affordable is to not have the diff fees not have the use permit and not have the neighborhood consent and keep it on the smaller side. Because again, I don't think they're going to be all over the whole town. So, and I think it is an option for attainable housing. I mean, I can see teachers living in people's backyards. And, you know, we've had teachers deny their contracts because they can't find a place to live. So I think this is something we should look at, because I don't want the legislature to cram it down our throat. And then I have other comments here, but I thought we were going to do away with all these density district comments in here too, and you still have density districts in here.
The way, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor Hunt, because this is coming ahead of the rewrite,
Okay.
this is showing how it would be incorporated into the current code, not into the new code. The new code, we actually do retain the density districts in the new code for residential districts, at least as the draft is written, as I've written it, mostly because you'd have to do a rezoning to get rid of that, but we're trying to simplify it significantly. But that is the way the current zone is written, or zoning ordinance is written, and so this is simply attached into the current language, the language of the existing zoning code, not into the new code.
And then Frank, the only other thing that I didn't see in here is there's no setback between the existing house and the accessory dwelling unit. There's nothing in here for that. So I think we should have something in there for that too.
Actually, there is. It's 3 feet roof to roof. It's actually a general requirement for all accessory buildings, and it's a little later. It's yes, it is down at H, I believe. No, I'm sorry. F, the minimum building space for detached accessory buildings, structures, or uses, including accessory dwelling units, shall be the greater of 3 feet roof to roof, or the minimum building spacing of the density district. In the way the current code is written, the density districts dictate what the separation is between on-site buildings.
So we're still going to have 10 to 20 feet side yards and backyards, whatever the current setback is.
No, actually, this reduces the backyard setback for ADUs. In most density districts, it's reduced down to 10. And that's one of the problems with current guest houses is they have to meet the backyard setback for the primary dwelling, which is usually pretty large, and so it makes it pretty much impossible to put them in. So yes, it does significantly reduce the backyard. It does retain the side yard setbacks, though, of the current.
This is backyard to 10.
Correct, in most cases, right.
Councilwoman Schumacher?
I just know that some of the areas in our town already, you have too many cars in an area already. And so if we're not requiring to add in the parking, we have problems with people parking in their landscaping in the front yards, on the street. It gets to be a tangled mess, and now you're going to add more to that by having somebody, you're saying like somebody like a teacher, that's not necessarily a relative. When you're talking a mother-in-law quarter, in Phoenix, when they built those, they had large backyards usually. They usually had an acre lot or a half-acre lot, especially in the older sections. They had the space to do this in. What we have here isn't necessarily large lots, but now you're going to make it multi-housing basically, only in certain areas. And I know I'm in construction now, and I see a lot of the contractors that have construction workers that team up. So they'll have 6 or 8, 10 guys living in a house sometimes. So you're talking a bigger taxation on the sewer, the water, how many people are going to be parking on one lot. They're going to cram too many people into a home as it is, and now you're saying you can cram more buildings. So I know when you're talking tiny houses, you don't necessarily have to crane them in. You can actually build them on site. But then you're going to have like the he sheds or the she sheds, and you're going to make those be a livable space. Now you're talking you need air conditioning, heating, more sewer lines, more electric lines, everything to do that. And you have to consider fire safety. If you have buildings too close together, one can catch another building on fire. When you're even just talking breezeways, you have an issue with having too much built up where you're not able to access easily to get in to save somebody. I mean, you have ingress, egress, you have all sorts of other things to consider. If this were an older town that had larger lots, I could see where there's a few areas, like behind Fry's, some of those are acre lots. I could see where they could use them and then add on to that, and they still have places for parking off the road. But when you have too many vehicles in a neighborhood, like let's just say Unit 19 or something, where people go, oh, I have a big backyard, I'm going to add this in. I don't think people are, in theory, it sounds great, but I think for the people who are going to try to do it, they're not going to build to standards that would be something if you were building a house to begin with and adding in a mother-in-law quarter right within the house. If you're coming in after the fact and you're trying to make it work, it doesn't necessarily mean that the standard of quality will be there. It'll be more of a thrown together item. Or if not, then why are you not considering adding in RVs that are already air conditioned, heated, have a commode, you know, everything that they need in an RV? It's still tiny living. It could be temporary, and they could also remove it at some point, versus when you add in the she shed that's now livable, or building in a house that's a guest house, it becomes a permanent structure that I think you really have to take into consideration your setbacks for fire safety. Just my opinion, so.
Councilwoman Leyva?
Just a quick testimonial kind of thing. My parents lived with us for quite a bit, and I was looking to purchase a house with a casita or a in-laws quarter, and I couldn't find one. And I was able to purchase one behind Fry's in that area, and it was perfect. So it is, I think that is something that can work with the proper stipulations. And it was a huge help for, and you know, for them and for us. So again, it was a half an acre house, lot, and enough parking and enough of everything. So there's definitely the proper zoning and requirements that we should look at before anything else. But it was great.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilwoman Dickinson?
Hi, Frank. Thank you for your presentation. So I look at this from a different angle as well, because I do not live in an HOA. I've lived here since 1994 and long before the developments were put in. And I've stayed in the same house. I've been there for 29 years. And I've seen homes that were built with no garage. And then when the garage was built as an add-on, of course, it reduced the views for people. The topography is we've got a lot of hills, and it would cause a lot of stress and grief, I think, to the neighbors. We also have parking issues. Our streets are very narrow. And in some instances, especially recently, we see families who have come together, as you were commenting about, bringing their parents in and other relations, and we end up with cars in the yard as well as on the streets now. And it's and I know that the living conditions, affordability is a main issue. It's part of that. It's part of the reason for that. Also, as what Kendall was mentioning, a lot of the original homes, the older homes in this area, we have telephone poles, and the electric wires are not buried. They're all hanging with transmitters on the poles. And that, I was told was, when I first moved here in 94, they said, oh, this is temporary. And the end house would have theirs buried, but then the next house would not. And it was like, well, this was not to be a permanent thing, but it ended up being permanent. Also, what was mentioned, you know, we do have easement areas between the houses. And I know APS comes along and they make sure that all the trees and bushes are cut appropriately. And so we have that going on as well. And I've also noticed recently that there have been families that are converting their garages into additional rooms and access into the homes. So my thought is that I would like to really wait to see what the legislature comes up with. Having sat in on a number of meetings with the League of Cities and Towns this last year, I, you know, have listened intently to this, and I just really feel that it is, it may not be so much for the surrounding developments an issue, but for where I live, it will be. And I would like to see what they come up with.
I see Mr. Prentice out there in the audience. I know, I think we've been using the 10,000 square foot lot size, which my math puts that just under a quarter acre. Is there a way, Mr. Prentice, that we could track how many properties in Prescott Valley would be affected by a quarter acre and a third of an acre? Is there a way GIS can pull that? And if that's possible, I'd like to just see what the numbers look like in regards to, obviously, the core of town and what that looks like. Some properties are capable of managing this and some aren't. So I think with that information, it would definitely help as well. So, Mr. Cassidy, anything to wrap up?
That's all I had. Thank you very much for your feedback.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, welcome back.
Okay, as I stated earlier, the reason for this presentation is to help staff, help our Planning and Zoning Commission, help council make decisions that are knowledgeable and knowledge-based and fact-based, rather than having the what-ifs and things that we don't know on projects that we're supposed to determine just by what was submitted, a site plan, a landscape plan, and whatnot. We want a more cohesive plan, so when we go out, say, for example, on traffic, we're all aware that it's looked at regionally and site by site and what would the requirements would be, because we know through the process, and staff is trying to explain it to some of our community members, this project that they're looking at may evolve over time. And with that evolvement, we may find out a new traffic situation that we may need to correct, which may cause lots to diminish or lots to increase in value as far as what was going and what the roads were going to be to put in. So we are requesting that we do, through our process, have an application process where it's all the same from a pre-application all the way through a final development plan, that the requirements for having submittals all relate to the same issues that we have, and I have in your packet, and I'll review with the presentation. Okay, so this is intended to take the mystery, as I was explaining, out of filing the application with the town of Prescott Valley. Sometimes at our planning commission, or even with our meetings with the developers, staff has questions. Well, what about this? And we get answers like, well, we don't know until we do the study. Right now, we're just getting it through for the zoning entitlements or whatever the situation that they have at hand. Whereas if we had the documents in front of us, such as the traffic study, we would be able to intelligently talk about the project as a whole. General submittal process, not specific to one application. In the past, we've said, oh, okay, this project doesn't need it, but this will. So therefore, we'll just continue getting this project moving forward, whereas others might be held up. So this will give a consistency with the general submittal application process. We want to include common support documents, plans for applications. Everybody, the developers, will be aware of what's expected. This is the cost of doing business in Prescott Valley. So we have it all aligned, and all our applicants will be familiar in due time with the process. It differentiates between large-scale projects such as master plans, subdivisions, versus small-scale projects and single-family units, duplex units, tenant improvements, sign improvements, et cetera. The smaller projects won't have to give all the submittals up front. Because they're smaller, we could kind of gauge it. We have our own area studies that we could base it upon. So small-scale projects would not be required to submit extensive studies. Oh, what am I doing here? Oh, I had this upside down, really. Oh, I still do. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm pushing the arrow. Okay, thank you. Don't have my glasses. So the developer's responsibility, developer investment up front rather than at the end of the approvals to guarantee advancement for the big picture analysis, not piecemeal. Sometimes when we bring projects forward, it's piecemeal, as you know. We get out there, we have traffic engineers that may attend a meeting or may not, but we get information from our public hearings from our constituents about things that may be with traffic. We look at light studies and whatnot. We've got safety issues, but things evolve. So developer investment, they'd be still making the investment, whether it's upfront or at the end of the project, we still need these studies. So we feel that having them upfront is a win-win for everybody long-term. Developer addresses any town issues early on to avoid last-minute stipulations which may cause delay or termination of a project. Sometimes if you wait too long, we always get developers say, well, you know, we didn't know this information up front. Can we do this? Then they're so far down the road with the project, we either have to be the bad guy to say, no, you have to do it, or they just pull away from the project because it doesn't make sense for their investment for the project. So this delivers us information up front so we run into that situation. It allows client and staff early response to any concern or impacts that the proposed development may reveal. You know, what we don't know is what we say in the next statement, we don't know. We want to reveal everything that the site is and how it fits in regionally and in context so that we can make wise decisions as a whole, or that council can. We can provide you with the facts, but if we don't have the facts in front of us, it's, I don't know, I'll get back to you. Staff will look into this. We'll do more research. This way we'll have automatic answers up front from when we first go through the hearing process. So we put a chart together indicating how currently we do it. In yellow is we let them go through the process and up until the very end for final development proposals that we take in the application. We don't have the studies up front, and we go through the whole process where we get constituents, ourselves, council, planning and zoning is frustrated because we don't have all the information to make decisions. This way you could see in the blue boxes, we don't allow, I mean, it's not for small projects, but we've included many of the studies that we want in advance, whether it's the traffic, it's drainage, it's the signage, landscaping, and any other archaeological or any other studies that we want up front. So we look at holistically what that project is actually going to present in front of you. So this is the change we want to make, is to bring all the studies up front, and so that we have it to bring to you at the decent time and appropriate time for approvals. So our next steps, we'll get direction from you, and we'll begin our outreach for collaboration. We'll get with our clients, meaning the different developers, the attorneys, and get feedback from them, because this is a definite switch, and it is having the cost come on the front end versus the back end. But, you know, we will explain to them the rationale, and we'll return to you with our findings and recommendations. They may have something to say that might tweak it, so it's really a collaborative effort, but we want to go and get some outreach into this. And upon our outcomes, we'll take it through the zoning code modification process with planning and zoning, and then back to you for final approval. And with that, I can answer any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. I just think just getting the feedback is huge, and speaking with people from Prescott and the county and just trying to, again, be consistent with what the region is doing will make it easier on everyone and their expectations. So, Vice Mayor, you have something?
I think this is great. This is the way I'm used to having it done, and I think this is better information for our residents. This gives them all the information up front. This gives us all the information up front to make a really educated decision, and it really helps the developer. It costs the same amount of money and gets them started sooner. So I think this is a great idea.
Councilwoman Leyva?
Having all this information up front and going through this doesn't guarantee anyways the approval of the project. I mean, this is just so it gets presented properly to us and P and Z and all that, right?
Correct. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, yes, it keeps it up front. It doesn't guarantee it, but at the same time, it gives them assurances that if there's any questions from council, they can address it early on, or they can provide the city or the town for what we need early on. And it's their decision working through the process. And it kind of vets projects out. We get a lot of requests coming in and thinking that, oh, it's a process, we don't have to invest in this. And really no thought or effort has gone into this. We know that if they're putting the studies into this and providing it for us, they're serious about the project. They know it's no guarantee, but at the same time, they may come in and have a meetings with you all to indicate, here's what it is and why. Then they can explain to you and any of your concerns that they can address it educationally with all the facts, and then get your support.
Awesome. Oh, Mr. Davison.
I just wanted to add, I too, this is how I grew up in being taught with development related projects. And this is a change in how we've been operating. So we definitely want to make sure that we have some really good outreach and feedback from the development community, business community, chamber partner members, because it can be very important. But I really believe with our current process, we, have goes through P and Z to council for a zoning. And at that point, if you haven't drilled down with specifics on traffic and drainage and archaeology or anything else, it's very hard to craft zoning conditions. And if there's no zoning conditions, you could get through the project, and Ms. Kennedy highlighted this. You can be months down the road and something's wasn't caught in time, and now we're clamoring trying to figure something out. And there's oftentimes you don't come out with a good as good of a project. So this really puts the onus more on the front end of a development process, gets everything out on the table so that when the council and P&Z members decide on something, they have pretty good information. What this ultimately would lead to is a change in our whole development process. So final development plans really would become administratively done and perfunctory. You wouldn't be weighing in at the very last minute, adding new conditions to a project. That would have already been done months before when you gave preliminary approval to something. And the last thing that I just want to stress is sometimes developers, business people will hear, oh, this sounds like government bureaucracy. We can have both. You can have exceptional customer service. Ms. Kennedy and the whole team, we talk about this all the time. We can have a high standard of customer service, responsive, we're thorough, we're consistent with our applicants. But at the same time, we can expect high standards by everyone that's coming into Prescott Valley. So we don't have to take just what comes in the door. We can say, we welcome you, we want you to be a part of our community, but we have high standards, high expectations, and welcome, let's go. So just want to make sure that while this could be a change, it doesn't mean that we have to exhibit slow government response on things. We can have exceptional customer service with it.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. With that, folks, thanks for coming.